Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechtas Zevachim daf Ayin Hey. We are going to begin on Ayin Daled Medbeis, the third line from the bottom. Kodshim b'kodshim min b'minoi. So our Mishnah, all the way back on Ayin Medbeis, was discussing different mixtures in which sometimes, for example, if it's the Reish of the Mishnah of Chatas Hamesois, that gets mixed up with all the other animals, we say it's not batal. We don't say kol parish meruba parish because we're a chayshid of kavua. We say that yemusu kula. And then more recently, we were discussing a whole group of cases, including a case of a treifa, in which the din is it's pasul hakrava, but it's mutal hedget. And in that situation, we have the animal, because it's all mixed up with other ones, they graze until they develop a mum, and then it's sold, and then the value is used for those particular karbanos at the highest, most expensive animal. And then the Mishnah said, Nis'arvu b'chulin tamimim, if let's say a carbon got mixed up with good chulin karbanos, then yimachar chulin, you sell the chulin animal, and now this is the line that we're up to. Kodshim b'kodshim, which is on Ayin Alpha Medbeis. If you have kodshim mixed up with other kodshim, min b'minoi, which basically it's the same species of animal, zeh yikra l'shem mishahu, v'zeh yikra l'shem mishahu. So each person, because we don't know which owner this carbon belongs to, so each one can just bring the carbon. Or now I ask, so this is a kasha we had before, v'ho boy smicha. Now, how is it possible that you can just simply bring this carbon? If you don't know who's the owner, you can't do smicha. You can't have someone who's not the owner do smicha. So you can't have, okay, so each guy will do smicha on both of them. That doesn't work. So Rabbi Yosef, so our Mishnah has to be talking about b'karban nashim. It's only talking about with women, because we know that women, there's no din smicha. We also mention when it comes to a chatas, for example, there's no smicha. Obviously, we're not using that as an example because our Mishnah is talking about animals, behemos, not ophos. But therefore, our Mishnah, you're right, where we could remove the issue of smicha is only in a case where we're dealing with women. However, avol b'karban anoshim lo, says Rashi, miskashir b'teruvos bitmir. You're telling me, therefore, and it's really qualifying our Mishnah in a way which is very limiting, saying it's only talking about women but not men, which it's not mashma like that at all from the Mishnah. But again, how else could you understand it? Because you can't do smicha, and men have to do smicha on these karbanos. So in this, again, the Gemara asks the question as we continue Ayin Ham and Aleph. Esvei Abaya. Carbon yachid shenis be carbon yachid. Let's say you have a carbon in which belongs to an individual and it got mixed up with another person's carbon, or for that matter, carbon sebor shenis be carbon sebor. Let's say you have a carbon sebor that got mixed up with another carbon sebor. And then we have even the bigger problem, the carbon yachid, the carbon sebor, shenis arvizamazeh. And Rashi helps us out with these examples, going seir nasi, b'seir hamaraglim, ola ba'ola. So a nasi sometimes has to bring a he-goat, and sa'ir is also brought as a tzibor for the holidays. Or for that matter, a yachid can bring a carbon ola, was a dainain as a gift, as well as the tzibor. Of course, there's numerous olos. So what happens when you have these types of mixtures? So carbon yachid and carbon tzibor should serve as that. So noisin dal matanais mikol echad ve'echad. So you need to do 4 blood applications on the 4 corners of the mizbeach for each of these karbanos. even though maybe the dinim are a little bit different, doesn't matter. You should still do this. However, as we saw in Perek Beis Shammai a little while ago, actually it was on Daf Lamed Vav, the Perek began discussing that when it comes to all karbanos, and that includes achatas, according to Beis Hillel, as long as you did even one blood application, then that's enough for the kapara. Obviously, the mitzvah, we want you to do it properly, but one's enough. So to over here. Now, v'im nosan arba mekulon yatsa. Now, instead of you doing 4, as was described, mikol echad ve'echad, if instead you did 4 matanos each total, which means 2 for this one, 2 for that one, you're still yaitza. Obviously, because even if you did 1, apparently you're yaitza, right? As we said. V'im nasan arba mekulon yatsa b'medibur mamurin. When did we say that l'chatchil you need to have arba matanos for each of these mixed up karbanos? It's only shinis arbu chayin, when it was mixed up while it was alive. Now, this is where it's going to be problematic, because if it was mixed up while it was alive, these animals are still alive, that means that these karbanos required smicha. And apparently, we bypassed that issue over here, and apparently you could still do this. If let's say they got mixed up after the shechita was already done, then noisin arba matanos v'kulon. Then you do 4 matanos from all of them. So says Rashi, shenivul dama b'kais echad. Because what does it mean it was after a shechita? In other words, that all of the bloods were put into one kos. So noisin down matanos v'kulon. So you can just do 4, and that's it. And Rashi says, Ksavar yesh bila, which is an important concept of yesh bila, ein bila. So here it's yesh bila, that even though they're mixed together, we're not going to say that each blood application was only for one of the animals, but maybe each blood application had in it some of all. So it was all mixed together. So you don't need to do separate blood applications. That's only while it's alive, and then you have to do the 4 blood applications for each carbon. Over here, since it's already mixed up in a kos, so then all you have to do is the 4 times from the kos. That's it. And again, as we said, if you only did 1, even there you yatsa. Rabbi hamatana im yeshba kadei lazek sher v'im. He says you actually have to see how much blood is inside. If there's a tiny amount of blood that it cannot possibly account for all the different karbanos, then it's not going to work. Okay, now that again is a side point. What Katani is, but what do we learn? Katani yachid domi de tzibor, mat tzibor gavri, av yachid gavri. So just like carbon tzibor, it's for men. So too, when we're talking about a carbon yachid, we're talking about with men. So what? So it says Rashi, the after the boy smicha, right? Sibor lo matzi oisve shin smicha b'tzibor el b'chatas hapanimav. Typically speaking, we do not do a smicha on a carbon sibor. Smicha represents like the individual the carbon represents that person. So smicha is generally for a carbon, which is for a carbon yachid. And it says hapanimis lo kamayri meditani arba matanos. Okay, so the fact is, it's not referring to that particular type of carbon sibor. So therefore, it must be talking about just in general, in which it's talking about a man, and men need smicha, right? So you need smicha by a carbon yachid. So the question is, apparently that's not a problem, right? So my answer is, Amarava Batizma, does that make sense? Hamasratstahi. You think that is the correct way of understanding this? That when it says chayin, that the animal is alive, right? Mamish means before the shechita and everything. and therefore you could still do it then? No, that's not what it means. The Tani Mamed Morim Shenesarbu Chayin of Nesarbu Shchutin Lo, my Mali Chayin Mali Shchutin. What's the difference if it was alive at the time of the confusion or the Shchita? What's the difference? It's still the same confusion. Ella Hachikarm, this is how you read it. The Medaber Morim Shenesarbu Shchutin Ke'ein Chayim. It means like it's alive, which means b'kaisais, that if it's in numerous cups, right? It says Rashi, kosos b'kosos, dahainu kein chayin d'chol chad l'chudikoi. Like you have this animal, and this animal's alive. It doesn't mean it's alive, because you can't do it in this case, because it would be an issue of smicha, and you need to do smicha. So that's teretz. But why does it mean chayin? It just means just like a living animal, there's an animal, there's an animal, there's an animal. So do all the kosos were separated. So if the kosos, in that case, were separated, then when you do the sprinkling, then you should do the sprinkling from each of the kosos, because they're not mixed together. However, the boilel, if let's say it's all mixed up into one cup, nice and dal matanas akuan, then just do one. V'im nasa matanachas lukuan yatsa. But if it's not a live animal, since it would require smicha. Okay. Now we go into this other shita. Rabbi Omer. So apparently, again, our Mishnah has to be talking about with women when there's no din smicha. Okay. Rabbi Omer roines hamatana. We look at the situation of how much blood we're dealing with. Im yesh bo kedei lazek shervi mabsula. Mi'isle Rabbi Haisvara. Does Rabbi really hold to this logic that we have to look into the matter and to be able to figure out whether or not there's enough? Vatsanya. Omer Rabbi, L'divri Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Eliezer, we're going to go back to see Rashi. Hazak kol shehu mitahares, hazeinu sricha shir. Hazah mechsa kasher, mechsa posel. Okay. So let's look at Rashi on the previous on Amud Aleph. So Rabbi Eliezer, legabi chatas, mei chatas, by the Parduma. So it's going to say by next week on Daf Pei. It says sluchas shel mei chatas hamukdashim. So let's say you have this kli shenafel v'toichen mayim acherim. So it had mechatas, and there was other waters that fell into koshu, even the smallest amount. So you have a mixture of mechatas and mayim. Rabbi Eliezer Omer yazesh te hazois. Rabbi Eliezer says you should do 2 sprinklings, and l'kaman mafarish mil say it's going to be explained why. V'kaimer Rabbi l'dim Rabbi Eliezer hazah enosricha shir. Agaba de Gavra. He holds that you don't need to have a certain amount of the mechatas landing on the person. The person doesn't require, there's no shear on the person. Disricha shear, because if there's a certain amount that's necessary, nihi nami diyesh bila. Even if you want to say again, the water and the mechatas is all mixed in together, and we could rely Devada yesh b'chlal hazah min hamayim haksherim umitztarfin. So you would think, therefore, it should work. Masha b'rishayna ma b'shniya miyayimer demali shiura. So who would? It doesn't distinguish between the first person and the second, right? So you would maybe think that eventually would get lost that amount. So he holds that you are allowed to do this. And apparently he doesn't hold of this concept that there has to be a specific amount, because if you would do this, it would still be okay, apparently, over and over. Let's continue on Hamad Beis. And let's see the words one more time. So, Hazah kol shehu mitaharis. As you said, even the smallest amount will work. And the Gemara is going to ask later on, why then do you have to do 2 sprinklings? So hazah enu sricha shear. The sprinkling does not require a shear. Hazah mechsa kasher umechsa pasol. So look at this part of the Rashi. Klimer v'lo tema da hazah kolshehu timetaharas umihu im ein imam mureves psul. Wasn't mixed up would be pasol. El fil yeshima taruvas psul kshera. Even if it's mixed up with something which is not part of it, it's still kosher. Umechsa lav davka. It doesn't really mean half. El lekashir. Because the gadayatach dehu adin umatan damim. So the question is, so how come when it comes, he said by matan damim, well you have to have a certain measurement of blood. We don't see this when it comes to the mechatos. So with the vara of Rabbi Lezer Kaimer, so you could say one answer is with the vara of Rabbi Lezer Kaimer, right? This is according to the words of Rabbi Lezer. They're two separate cases. So maybe when it comes to the dam application, so therefore you need a shear, right? Because again, you have to put it on different corners of the mizbeach, and this is just a simple application. So maybe it's different in this situation. Okay. Let's continue. Nisarvu bebechor umaiser. Okay, now let's go back to the Mishnah. We have another Mishnah coming up. I won't have to keep flipping back and forth. So on Ayin Aleph Amid Beis. So Kachim and Kachim Min. So he said again, Mishahu. Right. I'm just going to write over here. The Gemara says this case is only by Nashim, since men need to do smicha. Okay, so I chazer this Gemara for my next test. I'll remind myself of the Gemara I'm going to get to. Okay, kachim and kachim min b'sheinu mino. They're not the same animals. Then yirad shi'etstavu. Then you have to let it graze. Okay, and then it says nisarva b'bechor b'maiser. Let's say karbanos got mixed up. For example, a carbon ola with a bechor or maiser behema. So yirad shi'etstavu. Also in that case, it says you should just let it graze, get a blemish. Yochel kibechor ukamaiser. And then you can eat it because a bechor and meiser belongs to the person or to the Kohen. So then they could eat it. Okay. Now Rashi over there talks about, and we're going to see this in a second, that bechor and meiser have different dinim. Right? It says v'yochel muravim kulon. You can eat them all together, but tyrus bechor and meiser bali mumin. Shelo yishchatu beitlas, right? It cannot be shechted in the marketplace, like at the butchery, because that's like a bezoyin. You can't be shechted there. Lo yimchru beitlas, lo yishkelu belitra. You can't weigh it. So this is what's unusual when it comes to this compared to psul mikdashin, as Rashi points over here on Ayin Aleph Amid Beis. This is a good hakdama. It says. They call psul mikdashim. Anytime you have a carbon which is pasul, hanasam lemikdash. So in that situation, normally it still has to be given over to the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore because the Beis Hamikdash will make money or will profit from it, lefikach nishchatin beitlas liachar sheniftu. After it's been redeemed, you could actually take that animal which was once a carbon and shecht it in the marketplace. V'nimcharim beitlas, they could be sold in the marketplace. V'nishkolim belitra. So all these different things are allowed. However, chutz min habachor meiser, that you're not allowed to do. Why? Shahanasan lebalim, because she'ein mavian b'demehim carbon, because you're not going to use with this money a carbon. So therefore, that is an important distinction when it comes to psuli hamikdashin and when it develops a mum, right, which becomes puzzle. So in that situation, when you're playing it, you could bring it to beitlas, you could shecht the beitlas, you could sell it there, you can weigh it with regular scales. Even though there is an element of bezoyin lehekdish, but because the hektish, the Beis Hamikdash is benefiting from the profits, so therefore we want it. You could do it that way, but not when it comes to Bechor and Meiser. Okay. All right. With that brief hakdama, let's continue. Nisarvu b'Bechor b'Meiser. So Amar Rabbi Bar Chama Bechor l'Beis Shammai. Says Rashi, Alpha P Shehumam Uvazman Azeh, that it says even if it has a mum nowadays, Ein Machilin Lenidois. So this is brought down in Bechor, that we are strict when it comes to a Bechor animal, even Bizman Hazeh. Okay, now it has to be eaten with an element of Tahara. So Tumuraso Mahu. What is the din with its exchange? That's one question. Bechor Eino Nifte. We also know that Bizman Hazeh, Bechor, we do not, we cannot be poide it, right? It says Rashi. Okay, I didn't get that. Tumuraso Mahu. What's the name of its Tumura? Okay, that's the second question. Third question. Bechor Eino Nishka B'litra. As we said, when it comes to a Bechor, when it develops a mum, you cannot weigh it in the marketplace, right? Says Rashi, im habkoin moicher b'saroi. If let's say we're talking about again bechor, which the kohen eats, not the Beis Hamikdash, so it cannot be nishka b'litra. Tumura somahu. So all these questions about the tumura. So Marava Tanya, bechor meiser. When it comes to carbon, or bechor, not a carbon, rather bechor and meiser, behema, mishahumamu, when they develop a mum, oisin tamura. So it's oisin tamura. Here's the answer: tumurasin keyaitz behen, and its tamura is just like them. So therefore, just like Beis Shammai says, the din of a bechor in machil nedidos, so too by tamura. Just like when a bechor cannot be poide, so too by its tamura. And a bechor cannot be nishkal but litra, so too its tamura. Okay, so all those are the same. So Bali Rami Bar Chama, hit this bechor lebedek abayis mahu sheyishkal b'litra. Now, normally we say that a bechor, because it is only being used by the kohen, that it's not allowed. We're not allowed to have it be weighed. We don't allow that. Now, in this situation, the question may be different because it's being given to the bedek abayis. So Ravcha the hektish adif. So in this case, the Beis Hamikdash does get benefit. Says Rashi v'yishka b'litra kedei was she samsim b'chiraso v'yirbu damav. If you don't want to approximate, if you just approximate without weighing it, so you're not going to be able to sell it for the same amount as if you get the exact weight. So it's a profit to hektish. So even though, typically speaking, when it comes to, as we said, by typical Tzum Mikdashin, then you are allowed to do it because it's considered to be beneficial for the Beis Hamikdash, but not by a Bechor because there's no Hana that's given. But says Rashi, V'hai da'atfis l'bedek abayis hanas l'hekdashi. So maybe it should still now have the din as regular psuli hamikdashin, and therefore, because now the hana will go to the Beis Hamikdash, then you should be able to be sheyishkal b'litra. You could weigh it that way. Odilma zilusa de bechor adif. The reality is that we can't compare it because there's a special din that when it comes to a bechor, we say no. There's a zilusa, specifically by a bechor, and that even in this situation, we don't allow it. So that's the question. So Rav Yosi bar Zvida Tashma. Nisarvu b'bechor b'meiser. What does our Mishnah say? They all get mixed up. Yirad shi'itstavu. So let them develop a blemish. Let it graze and get a mum. The yoichel kibechor k'meiser. And it says you should eat all these karbanos as a bechor and as a meiser. Lav lememra. Isn't that not come to tell you din and nishka b'litra? It's telling that you can't do it, right? It's come to tell you that they have all the same dinim. And here says Rashi, now v'yafagav the ikap say that the hektish gabi pidin shar Zevachim hamuravim shepidin demehim lehektish. So its value is supposed to be given over to hektish because some of them do belong to it. So we see that in this situation, you would not be able to be nishko b'litra. You have to treat it the same way, even though it's a hefsid for hektish because b'chor is in the question. Rav Huna, Rav Chizkiah, Talmid of Rav Yirmiyah, Amri, they said, Midami, how could you compare these two cases? Hasam, over there, when you have this mixture of animals which are not a b'chor, animals that are b'chor, shtei kedushos, there's two kedushos, shtei gufin, there's two different animals. So maybe that's the reason why we say that we're not going to be nishko b'litra. B'hacha, by being typhus l'bedekabayis, shtei kedushos b'guf echad. It's the same animal. So in this situation, maybe it's different, right? The kedushas b'chor, kedushas bedekabayis. There's two different elements of kedusha, but maybe because of ravcha de hektish, maybe we will allow it. Maybe the only time we don't is if it's two animals, like in our case of our Mishnah, or many animals. Some and over here it's one animal. So maybe by one animal we will be shishka b'litra. So that's perhaps a distinction. Mask Rabbi Yosi Barabin Ma'ilu Oimer Hiftuli Bechor. Madach, if a person say, redeem for me my Bechor, Shitfis Solo Bedekabayis, that I'll be typhus, that money, it'll go to the Bedekabayis, Klum Shaimin Lo. Would anyone listen? Hiftu Rachmana. Hiftu. Rachmana Oimer Lo Tifte. It says, don't redeem it, right? So if someone would say this, they're not going to listen to them. Says Rashi, Shiyatzel Chulin Mikadushas Legazis Le'avid, because it goes out to Chulin from its kedusha as far as it being able to be able to work in for its shearings. And the Torah says you're not supposed to redeem a bechor. Elam Rabami Klum Hiknazeh Elama Shikune Loi. It was only what was acquired by him. So it says again, the Labra Divrei Torah, U'Parchinan Hiftar Rachmana Imelu Sifta V'Al Devarav in La'avor. You can't just do this. Avulishka Belitra in Kanavera Al Divrei Torah. So maybe the whole issue is redeeming it. However, but maybe using the weights is not an issue. Elam Rav Ami, says Rashi, Rav Ami answers like this. Hachi Iko Mishita Lebe'en. This is how we answer our question. Kulam Hakana Hakayin Zela Bedekabayis. This Kayin, who's being maknit to the Bedekabayis, Elama Shekinoi Lo B'Bechor Zeh. He's giving over what he has. So he could have kept it for himself. He gave it over to Bedekabayis. So whatever dinim that applied to the Kohen should be transferred over to the Bedekabayis. Givan de Etzlo Lo Huter Lishko B'Litra, since he, the Kohen himself, can't do it, and Yochel Haknos Lo Bedekabayis Oidif Demei Tzimtzum Mishko Halitra. So then it also won't work by Bedekabayis. Okay. So the question 7. Hamatvis b'chor bedekabayis mahu shishka b'litra. So mahim study the hayiboya. What's the answer? What's the reason? Okay. So is it because of Ravach of Hektish? So because of the Ravach of Hektish will be mazalzel, just like other psuli mikdashim, or we say no, it's not. It's not comparable. I love these acronyms. Right? Psule ha mikdashim. Oh, the lo dami mishum dahacha beis kedushos hein. The ain mazalzalan bebechor mishum psul mikdashim. Pashu the ain ishkabulit. You cannot the loy hik the kohen lebedekabayis el mashikani lo. So just like the kohen can't do it, right? Just as the kohen can't weigh it. I'll just write weigh it. So too for bedekabayis. Okay. Bedekabayis. Okay. All right, let's keep moving. We're only going to get to the Mishnah today, but let's see this next piece. Hakol Yechoyin L'Sariv. So, all of these different problems could take place. You can have a bunch of karbanos, you don't know which one's which, with the exception of, as Rashi, Mishnah says, on Ayin Alpha Beis, Chatas and an Osham. Now we know a carbon Chatas is always a Nekeva, and a carbon Osham is a Zachar. So how can you confuse the two? You'll obviously know if it's in a cave. They're a bunch of zachar karbanos, and then you have one nekeva. You know that the nekeva that got mixed up is a chatas. So Gemara asks the question. So okay. So ma'ishna chatas v'asham the high zachar behind nekeva, because if we're talking about a chatas is always a nekeva, and asham is always and the other one is always a zachar. Why does it say it the other way around? High zachar behind a keva. Okay. So v'oila nami, when it comes to karban oila, you could say the same thing. Ika seir nasi. So when it comes to a karban oila, there is the seir nasi. So it could also be a confusion when it comes to that. So high seir behind semer. So this one is a seir, and this one has wool. What does that mean? So in Rashi, seir, a sa'ir, a goat, ein lot semer, ela seir. Aval asham, ayil, which is a ram, v'yesh lot semer. So basically, they still are discernible. Okay. I think that's the answer. Pesach v'asham nami lo ma'ariv. So they also shouldn't be able to get mixed up. So basically, you can't include the oil because they're different. Pesach, which right, is also very specific, and an asham nami lo ma'ariv. They should also not be able to get mixed up because high ben shanim, high ben shtei shanim. A karban Pesach is a year old, and an asham is 2 years old. Like, how am I supposed to know the difference between that? Between a couple days. But apparently, that would be discernible. So, ika asham nazir, the asham etzayra. So the answer is that when it comes to an asham nazir and an asham etzayra, says Rashi, keves. It says the lashon keves, and stam keves ben shanahu. So because it's true, sometimes an asham, typically most times an asham is ben shtei shanim, and a Pesach is always a ben shana. So the reality is, you should be able to tell the difference. But no, because sometimes there's an asham which is an asham nazir and asham etzayra, which is less than a year old, also the same age as a karban Pesach. So again, it could still get confused. Okay. V'ibois ema ika ben shana demixi keben shtei shanim, ika ben shtayim demixi keben shana. So a pretty straightforward answer, which is what I was thinking originally, is that between a zach and a cave, I could tell the difference. However, between a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old animal, I cannot tell the difference. And it's not even a year. It could mamish be just a small amount of time, right? A matter of a day or a few days, let's say, is the difference between a karban Pesach, which can no longer be brought because it's already just past its year. Okay. We're going to stop there. Let's look at question 8. B'mani karois hachatas meha asham. How can we tell the difference between a chatas and asham that nan the efshel lehem lis arev? So a chatas is an akeva, and an asham is a zachar. When it comes to a chatas nasi, it comes from a sa'ir, which comes from a male goat, which is nicker b'sa'aro. It's recognizable with its hair. The asham ayilhu the yeshlo semer, and when it comes to an asham ayil, it has hair. Okay, so that's basically the distinction. Chatas hanosi haba seir zachar nicker b'sa'aro. The asham ayilhu the yeshlo semer. It's recognizable that it is that it's an asham. But the nicker besar the asham ayilhu v'yeshbot semer. Okay, so basically, again, that's why our Mishnah says these specific cases that it's davka when it comes to between a zachar and a keva, where there'll be a confusion. However, when it says again, ask the kasha behind the keva, sochatas v'oilanami ikasir nasi, right? so you have the seer of a nasi, which is an oila. So hay sa'ir v'hay semer. So again, because of that, apparently, it sounds like it's a kasha. Okay. Anyway, so that's the Gemara's discussion about how you can discern between one animal and the next. Okay, we'll stop there. Ad kan.